It's a wonderfully loose feeling just to be here. You don't feel like people are monitoring you and making sure you're behaving correctly. I'll go to Canada for 2 weeks and then come back here and it's like, oh, okay, now I can relax.
This is Sean. He's a Canadian who has been living in Serbia for 12 years. He previously lived in Hungary and in 2010 he started his journey across the world on his tiny Vespa from Serbia, traveling to 43 countries. After the trip he returned to Serbia and settled here. As we're told, he shared with me how it feels to be a Canadian son-in-law in Serbia, why people in Serbia are much more open than people in Canada, and why life in Serbia is easier than in Canada. Enjoy!
I got the sense when I showed up that, the country was reeling still from a disastrous 90s, but there was also this kind of hope in the air. And everybody's like, moja, moja. It was a very kind of exciting place to be. I think that's been tempered a lot with a sort of like status quo, nothing will ever change. But things have improved. I mean, the roads are in better shape. Incomes here haven't kept pace with the rest of Europe, or the rest of Eastern Europe, but it is noticeably improving. There is a sort of burgeoning middle class here, but it's also become more boring. It was very exciting. It used to feel like a place where anything could happen, and it was friendlier 20 years ago. What I loved about Serbia back then was it was so stubbornly resisting modernization in some ways. Like, it was still stuck in its old ways, and that had a lot of charm to it. It was lovely to find like a little corner of Europe that was not homogenizing with the rest of it, and customs were different, and people smoking everywhere.
They're still smoking.
They are still smoking. They still have that going for them. It still makes them a bit different. But just that general friendliness, there's a whole lot that is slowly going away. But Serbia, more than anywhere else in Eastern Europe, as far as I can tell, is still hanging on, is still clinging to some of these old things. And they still send telegrams when somebody dies. Like, that's the only thing. You can go to the post office and send a telegram of condolences to your friend or relative when somebody dies, and that's the only reason it still exists. As far as I know, you can't do that anywhere else. It's just one of 100 little examples of these sort of quirks that still kick around. I mean, I've never sent a telegram in my life. I wouldn't know how to do it, but you can walk into the post office and do it. On the morbid subject of funerals and such, the other thing I was struck by was, and I don't know what the customs are necessarily elsewhere, but if somebody dies, that day, people start showing up at the widow or the widower's home, and you have to have food ready. And there's no arrangements for that. It's just understood. And so like 100 people can just show up at your house at the moment of like your intense grief. Family and friends, they just converge. It's quite a thing. I don't see much changing in this regard. For better and for worse, I did like the fact that it was different here, where family seems to be like a tighter bond, which can be a burden, but also a huge security blanket. And that still seems to be the case here. Like, they're all doing Sunday lunches. Mothers-in-law, their Sundays are very busy. Like, they're just cooking, and it's still a custom. And I don't see that going anywhere anytime soon.
So you are married to a Serbian wife?
Yes, I am a Srpski zet, that's correct.
Being married to a Serbian wife, you might have encountered a lot of differences in everyday life on the cultural level. Maybe you can remember one or two of them. Even
though Serbia is at once modern and Western, it hangs on to some very clear boundaries about roles in the house. There's the man and then there's the woman. And the woman in the home is in charge. You're basically a guest in your own home as a guy, but you've got your responsibilities. But there's a set of rules and you just can't violate them. It's not even up for discussion. So I find that as a Westerner here, I'm still straining against this slippers issue. You got to wear slippers in the homes. And if you don't wear slippers, you're some kind of savage. And I still forget. And it's a problem. Believe it or not. Walking around with my socks. Put those slippers on. Oh, okay, all right, fine. You forget. Stuff like that. But there's all the other things. And I don't know, these aren't uniquely Serbian things, but they're more like Balkan or possibly Eastern European things. Like, so we have a daughter. She goes swimming or takes a shower. That kid's hair has to be bone dry. The hairdryer gets a workout, like, constantly. It's this belief that if you have wet hair, especially in children, that child will die. So I just find a lot of these precautions against wind, wet hair. For maybe the first year or so, you kind of strain against it. Like, oh, this is nonsense. Like, I know this for a fact, because it's a big world. There's like 500 million people in the Americas who don't believe any of that stuff. And their life expectancy is the same as here, even higher. And they never heard about Promaja or the fact that wet hair will kill you. It doesn't matter. All the evidence in the world won't save you. You just got to play by the rules. It's a win in Rome thing, and that's it. So just go with it.
I've read a book called Guide to Serbian Mentality by Momo Kapoor. Maybe
I have 3 copies. It's a gift book.
Yeah, it's a gift book, and my wife recently bought it. There is a sentence there. There are 2 things that Serbians are afraid of. First, ice, and second, cold wind.
Yeah, it's high up in there. This is a shocking amount of ice, but the waiter knows I'm a foreigner, so he gave me more than 1 cube.
In the same book, there is a sentence that reads like, Serbia loves its foreigner son-in-laws.
I'm in a protected class. It's quite remarkable what I get away with. And I don't know why. I don't understand it. It could be just traditional Balkan hospitality, but the joke is usually that the kind of the easy treatment you get is out of pity. Basically, it's like, oh, you have enough problems, like because you married a Serbian. It's a joke. It's like a very misogynistic joke. But every time I get pulled over for just the license check or maybe even speeding, the cop figures out like, okay, oh, you're from Canada. What are you doing here? And Srpski zet sam. They're like, oh, ciao, and they just let you go. And it's like, but you can kind of see in their eyes, they're like, you poor bastard. That's what they're thinking. But they don't know. The reality is actually pretty good. So, it's win-win for me, at least. I really do think it's something I struggle with. I think as a foreigner, and especially as a Zet, I think I have an easier ride here than your average person. Like, you're kind of shielded from things. Most just native Serbs I know get knocked around a lot more than I do. So I think I might be getting away with something.
What about Canada? What about your relatives? What is the attitude to you being married to Serbian wife?
My folks weren't too happy about it. Like, Yugoslavia, why would you? Nobody wants their child to. Now that I have a child, I get it. Like, you don't want your child to live across an ocean. But they came to visit, I think, maybe 10 times. And they liked it here. And everybody I've had visit, apart from a few people, they liked it. They're like, oh, okay, I get it. I see why you're here. I think you have to come and experience life here or just get a taste of it, and then you can kind of understand the appeal.
As I see, you speak Serbian.
Badly, very, very badly. Tarzan Serbian. And I understand far more than I speak.
In your family, you're speaking in English or in Serbian?
English.
Only English. So your daughter is bilingual?
Yeah. Serbian's her mother tongue, so it's like Serbian is mommy's language and English is daddy's language. And when they want to hide things from me, they just switch to rapid fire Serbian. That's fine. But I pay attention. I catch on to more than they realize.
3 best things that you love in Serbia.
Places like this, the kafana. Kafana in the traditional sense, not these like sort of modern club-like places. I'm talking like these old kafanas. They're kind of a dying breed, but there's still plenty of them. And it's one of the best things about the country. Everywhere in Europe has restaurants, but I think the Serbian take on it is, and Bosnian take and Macedonian take, they're similar. But I love these places. The price is right. If you like piles of meat, which I do, it's fantastic. But there is a sort of feel to them where anything goes. You're king for a few hours, provided you behave reasonably well. And you can just stay there, just hang out, and it's cool. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I find that most of my friends who visit, I take them to places like this, and they're like, yeah, this is cool. So I even have a group of friends, the Kafana crew, we call ourselves. We're all Srpski Zets, Zetovi. 2-3 times a month we meet up and make a night of it in places like this. It's better than a therapist. Do that a couple times a month and it sorts you out upstairs. So that's the first thing. Second thing that's great, day to day, is, it's a wonderfully loose feeling just to be here. You don't feel like people are monitoring you and making sure you're behaving correctly, or, oh, you parked 10 centimeters off of this line. There's none of that here. I like that sort of ease of existence here. It's just loose enough that you're not too worried about, let's say, German or Swiss or even Canadian levels of propriety. I love that about Serbia. I find that every time I come back here, I feel like I can relax. I'll go to Canada for 2 weeks and then come back here and it's like, oh, okay, now I can relax. So that's another thing. And the third thing is the people in general. The people are the main attraction for this town. It's a big city that still has a sort of small town vibe. You have to say Dobar dan to everybody you might know in your neighborhood. If you don't, you're kind of a jerk. You know, they've still got the elevator manners. Everybody's smile. There's a smile, a wave, and a chow. Like you have to do that here, and I really like that. You can't be completely alone here. It's impossible, and I like that a lot. And I also noticed the sense of humor here maps pretty well to my own.
What kind of sense of humor Serbians
Well, it's
have?
just this sort of wry...
It's not English sense of humor.
It's not the English, but it borders up against it, I think. It is a sort of wry, dark irony that the Serbs have, and it translates beautifully into English frequently. I found living in Hungary, I felt like an alien. And here, which is arguably in a lot of ways more different than my own culture, it has kind of this roundabout way, a similarity of culture. And so I can sit and, you know, my Serbian friends, their idea of what is funny usually has me laughing. It's pretty good. And that's the other thing, just the sort of mode of regular light conversation here is pretty jokey. It's jokey. That's what they're doing constantly here. That's the default interactions. You know, you compare it to Hungary, where the default mode is let's complain and see who has more problems. That's how you bond with somebody over misery. It has its own charm, but here it's just like goofy almost, and in a really good way.
Now, 3 worst things that you dislike in Serbia.
There was this train in Scotland that I took my family on. It's that steam train, a nostalgia train for tourists that goes, it's the Harry Potter train on that curved viaduct, and we rode that 2 years ago. Anyway, today in the news, it's canceled because it doesn't have like a centrally locking mechanism for all the doors or something. Party's over, all the Harry Potter fans are screwed. It's an example of like a sort of Western problem, like too many regulations and too much...
Safety first.
Yeah. And a friend of mine ventured that maybe a lot of these Western problems could be solved if they had a mentality of, well, how would they solve this in the Balkans? And you could get around a lot of the nonsense that way. But on balance, I do think that what my friend was invoking, like the Balkan solution to things, can lead to a lot of pretty disastrous things, like children's playgrounds that cave in because there was some corruption in the city, and the people who put the foundation to the thing cheaped out on that, and 3 years later the thing caves in. Stuff like that. And I'm really reluctant to say anything bad about this place because I've been a well-received guest here, but you know, I can call it like it is. And there's this constant sense of like, I'm getting out of here. You know, so that's a terrible thing when your young professionals are all like just constantly thinking like, is it time to leave? Is it time to leave? That sucks. I mean, that needs to change.
Do you feel the situation changed when a lot of Russians came here?
My landlord actually came to me and said, sorry, I got this Russian who will pay 3 times what you are. So the new price is this. That's the friendly price. I was like, oh, at least he's honest. I've found that the feeling about the influx of Russians and Ukrainians here, but I think the Ukrainians are here in smaller numbers, it's kind of neutral, but prices did get driven up. And there is that sense that, like, you know, Belgrade was already straining because of overpopulation. It wasn't built for this. In the 90s, like, it almost doubled in population from all the refugees who came in. So it still hasn't even caught up to that. And now that there's like this pile of people here. But on the upside, most of the Russians are bringing money with them, and they're not really a drain on the system. See, I've noticed the difference. I think all these TT bistros and all these TT this, TT that, all these restaurants opened up. There are some kind of like people like darkly muttering about the Russians, you know, sticking to themselves. They're not really integrating. I'm like, I don't know. I see some of the dads in the playground. They're Russian guys. So my daughter's playing with their kids, and it's fine. But there is a sense of like sticking to themselves. You know, you got to be charitable. I think most Russians who are here, and you tell me, they're not here by choice.
Yeah.
I mean, they chose somewhere, but they had to get the hell out because things are so rough back home. So you got to sympathize on a certain level. Like, I think if I were in your shoes, I would have done the same thing. You know, and you had few options. You had Georgia, Serbia, Turkey.
Armenia?
And Armenia, yeah. I'll admit, a part of me I used to like the sense that this was my little secret, right? This city was my secret. And that's over. That has been over for 10, 15 years. People are here now, and it's good. It means that Belgrade is, you know, back. It is functioning. It's a destination for lots of people. No longer the capital of a pariah state. People love coming here. You know, the more the merrier, I guess. It's just 100,000 people suddenly showing up overnight is not good for rental markets and stuff like that. And I'm fine, but I think about the single mom who was renting and now just can't afford rent and had to move to like middle of nowhere to be able to afford to continue to live. That's not the fault of the people showing up, but it was not very well managed, let's say.
In terms of safety, do you think Belgrade is a safe city?
Yes, and if you look at the numbers, I think the Serbian murder rate is right on the European average, which is to say very low and lowest in the world. So it's very safe that way. I find here that you really have to be looking for it if you want to run into some trouble. You're mostly left alone here. I don't know exactly why that is. Like even petty theft isn't a huge problem here. My Tashta, my mother-in-law, a couple months ago, a bicycle got stolen outside of her shop in New Belgrade. You know, and weeks later they were still talking about it. Ooh, this is a big, big story. I'm like, oh, like a bike got stolen. So I've also never run afoul of anybody didn't like foreigners or anything like that. Now maybe I'm lucky because I'm like, I don't think Serbia is any more racist than any neighboring country. You hear some coarse stereotypes, but it's just that's a matter of politeness more than, I don't think it's a fundamentally racist society. But I do hear that if you're like Asian or black, you might be at greater risk of running afoul of somebody. But even then it's so rare that you don't hear many stories. Like the only stories you hear are of like hooligans getting in fights or some idiot in a bar like looking to get into a fight. If you mind your own business here, you don't even think about safety. You have the spectacle of women walking home alone at 3 a.m. That doesn't, in Montreal, no, you need a guy with you. Like that's pretty standard there. Here, it feels so carefree when it comes to like issues of personal safety and such. So I think the stereotype or the reputation of Serbia from the 90s did it no favors, but it also made it an absolutely wonderful place to visit because you'd show up and you'd find that, oh, this isn't dangerous at all. Nobody's out to get me. There's no culture of muggings or anything like that. So it's great.
What things do you miss from Canada in Serbia?
I would just say just a general sense of order. Like, I mean, it's obviously a lot stronger in Canada. Obviously, the wealth has a lot to do with it. I mean, there's a lot of people here just barely hanging on. And that is a grim reality that it just kind of hangs over. It's like, people are struggling. When you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers, the incomes can be quite low for a lot of people, including doctors and stuff like that. And that's heartbreaking. So Canada's a more equitable place and it's just awash in money. And every visit home, I get kind of resentful of that fact because people don't know how good they have it. And there's a sort of complacency to Canada that just drives me up the wall. A complacency and a sort of sense of entitlement. And that seems to be missing here. It's a much more honest, people here live more honestly. Like they see things for how they are and deal with it. And they confront it. And they're also very direct about whatever might be bothering them. Whereas in Canada, that stuff just sits under the surface and simmers and stews and it doesn't have a good result. But I don't think either extreme is ideal. Most people here are like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, you're an idiot. Every one of my cousins lives in Winnipeg. Like, why are you here? Moving to a rich Western country isn't a solution to all your problems because they have their whole different set of problems that you have to deal with. And I know plenty of Serbs who moved to Canada and said, I don't like this. And they came back. They found it difficult to make friends or they just didn't fit in or they struggled with work. Costs are very high there, extraordinarily high. It's not a panacea to all of your Balkan problems emigrating to Canada. You got a whole different set of things to worry about there. But, sorry to ramble, I think that on balance though, I am happy that I had the upbringing I did. I like having sort of, let's say, a Canadian mind, a slightly different set of values to here, but I also feel very blessed to live here because it challenges a lot of that and I can see what's wrong with my own culture and kind of adjust and try to balance between the two. Actually,
what Canadians know about Serbia?
Very little, I'd say. It's the country of Novak Djokovic and not war criminals. That's so long ago now that it's like basically left the Western memory. There's no memory of that anymore, which is nice. Like, I mean, that is the first thing you think, oh, Novak Djokovic and that basketball player. These are great ambassadors for the country rather than the 90s cast of folks. So yeah, it's limited. Most people think Siberia or possibly Syria, which is a problem. I get that a lot. Where do you live? Serbia. Oh, must be cold.
Do you feel that your personality somehow changed through these 10 years in Serbia?
Definitely. And people tell me that when I go home. They say, geez, Sean, you're so direct. What's wrong? Oh, I can't believe you said that. There's a lot of that. And I think it's because I lived here. I think the younger Canadian me was very deferential, always keeping your cards close to your chest. You know, just not really saying what you think. And living here, even for a couple of years, you do pick up the same sort of directness of speech. If there's a problem, you voice it. I got a problem with you, and you try to sort it out rather than letting it sweeping everything under the carpet. And I think that's a pretty consistent stereotype, a stereotype that's mostly true. You can create problems, but it also prevents a lot of problems.
On my way to swimming pool, I always encounter Toronto bakery. Maybe you know, it's here in Dorchel.
Pizza joint?
Yeah, pizza joint. Yeah,
it's hilarious because Toronto has famously terrible pizza.
They have this maple leaf there and this Canadian maple leaf, and right to the next of it is graffiti "Fuck NATO," and it always strikes me like how it looks together. When you see such pictures, such things, don't you feel some kind of uneasiness or disturbance being in Belgrade?
On a personal level, I've been here 12 years. Try to be respectful enough, and I don't want to get in any arguments over the NATO bombardments in '99. You try to avoid those discussions because it's in bad taste, and my own feelings about it are very ambivalent anyway. But you don't want to get in those discussions because these are issues of the heart. People's minds are made up and they will never change. So you just sidestep it completely. But yeah, it is something I struggle with. And when my daughter's old enough to understand, she'll have to accept the fact that, if that Ministry of Defense building is still there, oh, Daddy's country was involved in that. It's ugh.